let's talk about Lab 6, which is about the axial skeleton. So some of the features that you need to know of the skull bones: you need to know the frontal bone, which forms the front of the face. You need to be able to identify the frontal squama, flattened expanse, and you need to be able to identify the supraorbital foramen, or the supraorbital notch. Next ones that you need to be able to know: the two parietal bones, one on either side. There aren't any features that you need to know about the parietal bones. The occipital bone, this is the big one in the back, it's just one. You need to be able to identify the big hole, the foramen magnum. The occipital condyles, you're going to see smooth articulating surfaces on either side of the foramen magnum. And you're going to see an opening in the side of the occipital condyles, passing through the occipital condyles. That's that hypoglossal canal. So if you had a pipe cleaner, ooh, sorry for the color, then that would be going through the hypoglossal canal. On the sides, illustrated here in brown, these are the temporal bones, forming the inferior lateral walls of the cranium. The external structures, you'll see the external auditory meatus, an opening leading to the middle ear. See the zygomatic process of the temporal bone extending out to the zygomatic bone. Where the mandible is articulating, that indentation, that's the mandibular fossa. This right here is the mastoid process, a site for muscle attachment. And those are all of the external structures that you need to know. I'm going to go over internal structures in a separate video. You'll also be able to see from the outside just a portion of the sphenoid bone, and I'll have to go over some of the features there. You can see the ethmoid bone. If you look up inside the nose, you'll be able to see the perpendicular plate, which makes up that upper portion of the bony septum, and on either side the lateral masses, or they're also known as the superior and middle nasal conchae. The sutures of the skull, there's one between the frontal and parietal bones, that's that coronal suture. One between the parietal bones, that's the sagittal suture. One in the back between the occipital and the parietal bones, forming sort of a lambda shape, that's the lambdoid suture. And one between the temporal and the parietal bones, and that's going to be that squamous suture. Let's see what else we can know. From the outside, you can identify some of the facial bones. This big one down here, the only movable bone of the skull, that's the mandible. The U-shaped portion of the mandible, that's the body of the mandible. And then this part that sticks up here, that's the ramus. And from the ramus, you have a coronoid process. That's a site for muscle attachment, and the condylar process, falling apart here. The condylar process sits in the mandibular fossa of the temporal bone. The teeth are held in the alveolar processes. The mandible also has mental foramen, openings in the chin there, in the mental region. And then on the inside, you'll look to find the mandibular foramen. More facial bones include other bones that hold the teeth, the 1, 2 maxillary bones. They also have alveolar processes holding the teeth. They form the palatine process, which forms that anterior 3/4 of the hard palate. Other things to look for be the inferior orbital fissure, just down in the lower portion of the orbit of the eye. Other facial bones, the zygomatic bones. A feature to be able to identify on the zygomatic bones is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone, reaches out, forming that zygomatic arch with the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Nasal bones, there's 2 of them, forming the bridge of the nose here. And then just posterior to that the lacrimal bones. And the lacrimal bones are pretty much just one big indentation. That's the lacrimal fossa, leading into an opening where tears are draining. That's the lacrimal foramen. The bone that's forming the lower part of the bony septum, sort of shaped like a plow or a Dorito, that's that vomer bone, so making the inferior 1/3 of the bony septum. And then on either side, inside of the nose, 1, 2 inferior nasal conchae. So these are the same structure and function of the lateral masses of the ethmoid bone, but they're individual bones. Miscellaneous bones of the skull, not shown here, would be the hyoid bone, that unique U-shaped bone that supports the pharynx, and it provides an attachment site for muscles. And then those 3 middle ear ossicles, the hammer, anvil, and the stirrup, or the malleus, incus, and stapes.